So my friends, what are we to do about Thanksgiving? I'm going to gather my family virtually and share a meal with the favorite tastes of my childhood and my children's childhood. But I'm going to be observing and remembering other things as well. For the past few years, my husband and I have gone to Coal Hill in Plymouth and observed the National Day of Mourning on Thanksgiving morning every year. And it is always, always bitterly cold and windy. And I appreciate the company of all of you who have joined us. But when my children were young, we lived in Medfield, Massachusetts, a town that's about half the size of Middleborough. It's on what was originally Neponset land, Neponset tribe land. It was settled in 1649 by colonial residents who basically did not want to travel the half a day back to Dedham on Sundays to worship. So they established a community of their own. One year, while my kids were in school, the elementary school asked me to be the one to decorate the cafeteria windows for holidays that year. Now, I was not adept at making paper cutouts and intricate decorations for the windows. So instead, I would paint murals for each of the holidays. And my first one was Thanksgiving. Now, the third graders every year would spend several weeks preparing for an annual Thanksgiving feast. And they would go to a local park under supervision of teachers and parents, and they would cook over fires and produce the kinds of things that they thought that the pilgrims would be eating. Turns out they couldn't have cornbread or anything like that because they didn't have ovens. But I thought about these children and their faces and their costumes, and I painted a smiling face on every pilgrim in my mural, and they were receiving gifts from smiling Indians, and smiling children would run around underfoot and play. And in a separate corner, I had a table filled with pilgrim men and Indian men sitting down and smoking a peace pipe. Exactly the story that I had received as a child and that I passed on to my children. But things have changed. I've learned differently over the years, and every year I learned something new. Last year, the historian David Silverman sat down with Claire Bugos, who's a journalist whose works are published in the Smithsonian. And Silverman had written a book, and for those of you who are interested, it's This Land is Their Land. And in his interview, Silverman described the story this way. The myth is that friendly Indians, unidentified by tribe, welcome the pilgrims to America and teach them how to live in this new place, sit down to dinner with them, and then disappear. They hand off America to white people so they can create a great nation dedicated to liberty, opportunity, and Christianity for the rest of the world to profit. That's the story. It's about Native people conceding to colonialism. It's bloodless, and in many ways, an extension of the ideology of manifest destiny. That settlers felt entitled to take land, and that the people who were living there were gladly turning it over to them. So earlier you heard the history, and now you know the myth. I was curious, so I wanted to find out where the story came from to begin with. And a lot of it actually dates back to an enthusiastic Reverend Alexander Young, who published a book in 1841 that he entitled The Chronicles of the Pilgrim Fathers of the Colony of Plymouth from 1602 to 1625, now first collected. The book included a letter written by one of the colony leaders, happened to be on December 11th, 1621. His name was Edward Winslow, and he wrote, "Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, so that we might after a special manner rejoice together, after we had gathered the fruits of our labors. They 4 in one day killed as much fowl as with a little help beside served the company almost a week. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, and many of the Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the rest their greatest king Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor, and upon the captain, and others. And although it not always be so plentiful as it was at this time with us, yet by the goodness of God, we are so far from want that we often wish you partakers of our plenty." Historians suggest that the Wampanoag, who had a mutual defense agreement with the Pilgrims of Plymouth, showed up 90 strong because they'd heard the shots coming from the colony and were ready to defend their neighbors. They stayed to celebrate the harvest feast. And in 1841, Young added a footnote calling this joyful celebration the first Thanksgiving, and mentioning they no doubt feasted on wild turkeys as well as venison. This happy notion furthered the goals of descendants of the original Plymouth Pilgrims, who had been seeking to establish their heritage as the forefathers of the nation. Now, the reality is, as Kelly told you earlier, that in Edward Winslow's time, as for millennia all over the world, the term Thanksgiving, setting aside a time of Thanksgiving, didn't refer necessarily to a celebration. But it often was a day set aside for fasting, among other things, and giving gratitude to God for deliverance from want and from evil. In other years, as you heard, that deliverance might include war upon their neighbors. But this was not the story that Young and his readers wanted to remember. Indeed, it's not even what Abraham Lincoln wanted us to remember when he delivered his proclamation. You know, in 1863, Lincoln was struck by the fact that there was actually prosperity in the midst of this terrible, terrible war, in spite of what we were doing to each other. We had much to answer for, he said, and we could not do it alone. Remember his words, "With humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience, commend to his tender care all widows, all orphans, all mourners, all sufferers, and implore the interposition of the Almighty hand to heal the wounds of a nation." So, what purpose did this myth of Thanksgiving serve? Today we know myths very well, these alternate truths. They serve to give a particular people, in this case, the Pilgrims on Plymouth Plantation, a secure place in history that was never theirs. Plymouth was one of many settlements that survived under harsh conditions. This myth did, it also served to erase the identity of the Wampanoag. As Tisquantums, otherwise known as Squantos people, the Pawtuxet, were erased by plague. Myths serve to make a dominant culture feel good about its history. Myths serve to make the decisions that we make and the actions that we commit to stay in power feel moral and feel justified. We have learned a lot about the power of myth. Myth is a message with a purpose, either of subjugation or of liberation. Myths are either about subjugation or about liberation. And it is most powerful and most effective when it is taken for truth by our children. So what are we to do about Thanksgiving? I don't want to eliminate Thanksgiving. I don't want to distress anyone unduly for celebrating Thanksgiving. I am only asking us at this time to separate Thanksgiving from the Pilgrim and Wampanoag feast. To stop telling that myth in school, to stop painting murals, to stop gushing about it in magazines, to stop calling it tradition, to stop calling it history. Colonialist history with the Wampanoag and the other First Nations in this great country of ours does us no credit. The constant tragedy is that we have not learned from our sins and we still commit them today. But I am asking that we hold on to this holiday, but give it a different meaning. The meaning as it was intended, a gift to a weary nation from a heart-sick president. Let us separate Thanksgiving from myth and turn it back to a celebration of gratitude, of humility, and of hope. We are called to direct our attention, in Lincoln's words, to the foundation of all that is goodness and love in this world. So it is time for us to come together in joy and in sorrow, to deliver us from the things that keep us apart, to deliver us from the things that we can't admit, and so we can't overcome. To acknowledge our perverseness and our disobedience, and be thankful for the chance. Be thankful for the chance, for the possibility to change lives, including our own. James Baldwin once wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." To be better at this business of life, our history can and must be faced because it cannot be changed. Our convictions can and must be challenged. Our dreams can and must be shared. In the words of Naomi King, we wish for the abundance of this world to be shared, for fear to become love, for the lonely to feel welcomed, and for the suffering to know rest and joy. That can be our Thanksgiving dream. and let all America live here.